What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to do a deep dive on the seat options for the C8 Z06, including what the three options are, pros and cons of each seat, a couple other considerations, and ultimately my take on which ones to choose. This video marks the long-awaited start of my deep dives on the C8 Z06 and what options and specs you might want to choose from, and the goal here is really to help people in deciding what they want to pick for their own cars. Now at the end of this series, I'll be going over the specs that I'm planning to buy for my own Z06, as well as my reasoning behind it. And so as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about the seats, so let's get right into it. So right out of the gate, Chevy gives buyers three different options for the seats. There's the GT1, the GT2, and then the competition sport seats. First, let me start by sharing what Chevy describes each of those seats as. I'm going to quote here so I don't get it wrong. So the GT1 is a sporty style that emphasizes comfort while providing good support for performance driving situations, featuring Moulin leather trim, optional two-way lumbar support, and wing adjustment. The GT2, a first for Corvette, these seats have a racing-inspired look with comfort for long trips courtesy of dual-density foam. They include carbon fiber trim, a Nappa leather insert, Moulin leather bolsters, a jet black painted seat back, two-way lumbar support and adjustable wings, plus heating and ventilation. And finally, the competition sport seats. Designed for the serious track-focused driver, these seats include aggressive bolsters, full Nappa seating surfaces, and carbon fiber trim on the headrest, heating and ventilation, along with a new durable performance textile inspired by Kevlar vests. Alright, so now that you have the general idea of what these three seats are, at least in Chevy's own words, let's dive in a little bit and take a look at them in a little closer detail. We're going to go into the pros and cons of each, but you'll notice that I'm going to leave out subjective things like looks or aesthetics, because that's something that ultimately depends on each person, and it's not something I can objectively measure. Plus, everybody has a different look that they're going for. Alright, so let's start with the GT1. These are the base level seats. They come in the 1LZ car. Basically, if you bought a Z06 with no options, these are the seats you would get. The most obvious way to tell these apart visually is that the headrest on the back of the seat is actually connected directly to the center of the main seat itself, the seat back. The back and sides are kind of a matte texturized plastic, and basically it's a good no-frills seat. Now, depending on your body type and your body proportions, this may end up being the most comfortable seat for you, while also giving you some flexibility to move around a little bit while you're driving so that you can be comfortable on longer drives. So what are some of the pros for the GT1 seats? Well, first, they're designed for a lot of different body types. Basically, anybody can sit in these seats and be comfortable. They're not super aggressive on the side bolsters, they've got good cushioning and support, and on a long drive, these are something that aren't going to fatigue you if you're on a bumpy road or you're going to spend a long amount of time in the car. The focus on these seats is comfort overall. Obviously, they're still sporty, but these are really designed for maybe a grand tour or a big road trip or something where you're going to spend a lot of seat time in the car, and it's not going to be aggressive, track-focused driving primarily. And then also, they are the least expensive. They come with the no-frills car. If you got zero options, these are the seats you get. So one of the benefits to them is that they avoid raising the price of your car otherwise. Now, there are a couple cons to these seats. It does sound like the lumbar support is limited, and in some cases it may actually even be an option. Depending on where I looked online, I found there were versions of this seat that don't have lumbar support, as well as there are versions that do. So you may be a little bit limited in some of the tuning you can do to make it more comfortable for you. The GT1 also comes with the least amount of customization as far as different fabrics and finishes. You don't have the multitude of colors that you get with some of the other seats. And then lastly, and this is probably my own personal biggest thing, is that it doesn't come with any of the ventilation for heating or cooling. That may not sound like something you need to have, and probably for a lot of people it isn't, but I'll tell you, on a cold morning when you get in the car, to have a heated seat right away is really nice, and I certainly can speak to the cooling being a wonderful feature. My car has the ventilated seats, and in the middle of the summer, one of the nicest things is when you're hot, even with the air conditioning on, you can turn on those ventilated seats, and it's blowing air up through the fabric and leather of the seat, and it's really nice. Your back doesn't stick to it anymore, your shorts aren't stuck to your legs, and on a long drive, that actually leaves you feeling a lot more refreshed and comfortable than if you were sweating and sweating as you go along. Plus, one of the nice things is that as you're driving along, you can have the windows open and still actually get some of that cooling through the seat, which in the summer, who doesn't want to have their windows down and hear the beautiful sound of their car? So to me, that ventilation is probably the biggest con for these seats. Alright, so let's move on to the GT2. These are the up-spec seats that come with a 2LZ or higher trim package. By default, if you pick a 2LZ, these are the seats that you're going to get. They come with a gloss finish on the backrest. The whole back of it is like this fancy gloss black. And they have the famous floating headrest where the sides are what hold it up. There's nothing connected in the middle, which is really good if you're planning at some point to put racing harnesses in. It gives you that pass-through so that you can do that. And aesthetically, these seats evoke fancier cars such as a Lamborghini Aventador, which has a very similar style. Now, through my investigations, I couldn't actually find official documentation that said that these are any differently bolstered bolstered than the GT1 seats, though they do offer several quality of life improvements. So let's look at the pros for these. First, they also fit a variety of body types, just like the GT1. Overall, these are probably going to be more comfortable than something like the competition seat, and they're designed for a mix of performance driving as well as long time spent in the car, maybe on a long drive. The GT2 seat also has a lot more color and trim options as far as the materials for the seat, and you can pick from a number of additional colors over the GT1s. And then probably the biggest thing is that they're more comfortable because of a couple of the other options that are added. You have adjustable wings on the sides, which the GT1 also has, but you also gain four-way adjustable lumbar support, and that's standard for these seats, as well as you get the ventilation, heating, and cooling. So that right there elevates these for comfort overall, even if everything else is the same. And for cons, I actually couldn't come up with many. There's really just one, and the con here is that this is a more expensive seat. It requires you to have an up-spec car moving into that 2LZ or 3LZ trim package. Now that said, it's difficult to put a price on comfort, especially for things that you're going to be interacting with directly. The seat, as well as the driving controls, in my mind, are the things you interact with most on the car, because every time you're operating the car, you're using them. I would imagine that spending more money to get comfortable seats really seems like money well spent in my mind. And finally, we've got the competition sport seats. These are the Corvette team's answer to the carbon fiber bucket seats found in the GT line of Porsche's cars. These offer significantly more bolstering than the GT1 or the GT2 seats for aggressive on-track driving. They're designed to give you the optimal body positioning and maintain control of the car during really, really high performance driving. They also use a performance textile fabric in some of the high wear areas so that they can take the repeated abuse of track events. Now, for anybody who's never sat in a race car or been in a performance car that offers a seat like this, let me offer a little bit of perspective. When combined with a racing harness, a seat like this is designed to keep you from moving at all. You won't be able to slide side to side, you won't be able to move your legs more than a couple degrees in either direction, and ultimately your torso is locked in between those bolsters. Under really, really hard cornering, let's say above 1G or full braking load, you will not need to brace with your arms or legs to keep from moving around in the seat. The seat's going to take care of that for you. That said, your limbs are still going to have full range of motion to operate the controls for the car, so you can stay focused on the driving at hand. Now, in general, people really like the looks of these seats. They tend to have that most kind of science fiction feel, like they're out of a spaceship or something. But a lot of people find that the reality of owning a seat like this, especially for a car that you're driving for a mix of different types of driving, such as a leisurely drive along the coast or a drive up in the mountains or some highway miles, they find that the reality of these seats isn't always as nice as how they look. And that's because you're not going to be able to move around at all in these seats. And that's by design. Now let's get into some of the pros of this. First, it's going to keep you from moving around in the seat at all. It's going to keep you glued right in the position you need to be in for the most effective driving. You do get also the adjustable lumbar support as well as the heating and cooling ventilation, so that's really nice. And then something unique to these competition sport seats is that you can get them in any trim package for the car. So you could get a bare bones 1LZ car and actually add the competition sport seats in, and that could be your only option if you wanted to. Now, as I alluded to, there are several cons with these seats. First is that they don't fit all body types, and if you're a larger person, you're not going to fit comfortably in these seats. I'm 6'4", I weigh about 220, and I don't fit very comfortably in them. I can fit in, and when I've sat in these seats, you literally can't move at all. You're locked in. Now, this leads into that they may not be comfortable for long drives, specifically because of that bolstering. If you look at pictures, the leg bolstering alone on the pad of the seat, you'll notice the sides, they're at least twice as high as the GT1 or GT2 seats, and that keeps you from moving your legs side to side. And that means that you can't shift your weight around very much. If you're on a long highway drive, you've been in the car for a couple hours, it's nice to be able to move your legs around a little bit just to get a little bit different position. And you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to be locked in on that one position. And then lastly, one of the other cons is that these do cost additional money. Probably to be expected, but they're about an additional $1,000 on the Stingray. And though the pricing's not out for the Z06, I would estimate it's probably going to be somewhere in that range. So we've gone through the pros and cons of each type of seat, but there are a couple other factors that people also generally consider when they're picking the seats for their car. The first is going to be looks. Let's be honest, a lot of people do weigh looks fairly heavily when they're deciding on what options they want to pick for their car. While they may not need a certain performance option, if it looks cool, chances are somebody's going to spend some money on it even if they don't really need it. Seats are no different in that regard. For some people, they care more about how the car looks than the actual utility of the features that they've chosen. And this is how you end up with people who get the competition seats and then can't stand doing a long drive in their car. This is something we've seen both with the C7 as well as the C8. People who spec a seat that they don't actually realize isn't going to be great for the types of driving that they're doing. And then the other big factor is resale value, or somebody treating the car car like an investment. While the Z06 hasn't even come out yet, this is likely to play a factor for a number of people. A lot of people buy a car like this with an eye towards future resellability. As such, that means some people will spec whatever seat they think is going to give them the best resaleability of the car and provide the most value, regardless of if it's not the right type of seat for their driving enjoyment. It's a well-known phenomenon in the Porsche world for anybody buying a GT car that most people do spec the carbon fiber buckets because they look the best, they're the most purposeful, and they're what's intended for the uncompromising performance driver. It's also well known, however, that a lot of people who buy a GT car from Porsche also buy a second set of the adjustable comfort seats, pull out the carbon buckets, and put those in, and then when they're ready to resell the car, they swap back in the carbon buckets to get more money. All right, so we've gone through all the nitty-gritty details, and you know the seats pretty well at this point. Hopefully this has given you a good sense of the seats and what some of your options are, as well as maybe some of the considerations that you'd want to keep in mind. But I hear many of you asking, Fred, what do you think? First, I think the most important thing that you can do is sit in all three seats before you pick out the spec for your car. Though the Z06 isn't out yet, the Stingray has essentially the same exact seats as the Z06. This means that you probably have opportunity to go to the dealer where you have a reservation and ask to sit in a couple Stingrays that they have and compare the differences between the seats. But I hear you, what if you have a reservation in from a dealer on the other side of the country and you're going to get your car shipped? Well, you could go into a local dealership, ask some questions about the seats and see if they'll let you sit in a Stingray, or you could even look at used options and see if you get an opportunity to sit in one of those. Another option, as silly as it sounds, would be to go on some of the Corvette forums and ask around and see if there's somebody that lives in your area that has a C8 Corvette, see what kind of seats they have, ask them some questions about it, and maybe they'll even give you an opportunity to sit in the seats and see what you think. This gives you the added benefit of talking to an owner of the car who's lived with those seats for a little while and gives you a sense of if they like it or not, or with hindsight, would they have gone with something different. Next, I'll say I am a person who considers function over form if you have to choose between the two. You're going to see this as a recurring theme in my upcoming deep dive videos where I go into some of the other options as well. I don't believe in buying a car and saving it for the next person. Being stingy with the miles, treating it like a garage queen, picking options you think the next owner is going to appreciate more, and trying to focus on resale value versus your own enjoyment. Not everybody thinks this way, and your mileage may vary, but that's how I see it. I work really hard for my money, and I want to get the maximum enjoyment possible out of the car. I couldn't care less about potential future owners of the car and if I'll ever sell the car, so I want to be happy in the knowledge that I spec the car the way that it was meant to be for me. So for me, I want seats that best balance the way I use the car. That's going to be a mix of frequent relaxing drives, frequent really long drives, and occasional track events, so autocross, car control clinics, track days, even drifting. Finding that balance means I'm not going to go for the competition seats in my car, but I do want the comfort of the ventilation with the heating and the cooling. So for me, it's going to be the GT2 Seat. It supports adding a racing harness later on if I choose to go that route, and the bolstering is good enough as a hobbyist track enthusiast. It's comfortable, it allows you to move around a little bit, and it's not going to punish you on a really long drive. I hope this gives you some things to think about for picking your own seat on the C8 Z06, and maybe gave you some ideas on things you hadn't considered previously. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be doing a bunch more deep dives on all the other various options for the car, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and until next time, Fred out!